Hi, my name is Jeremy Smith, and I'm here to present my video presentation on family violence. I chose family violence because, again, if you remember from some of my previous videos, I'm from an urban area, what most people would refer to as the hood or something like that. But I witnessed a lot of domestic violence growing up in my own household, in some of my friends and family members' households. I can even remember playing in my community, playing in the yard or in the streets with friends, and hearing or seeing couples fight or seeing domestic violence. So it was very prevalent growing up. So much so to the point that a part of the reason that I came into social work is not only to mentor youth, but to make an impact or try to make a change in households or in families, and to do family counseling. But to get into this video, like I said, my video is into presentation. My presentation is on family violence. And the first thing I will touch on is what is family violence. When I searched, one of the best definitions I came up with was this one. Family violence is a behavior within an intimate relationship that causes physical, sexual, or psychological harm, including acts of physical aggression, sexual coercion, or psychological abuse and controlling behaviors. Um, and that's a very interesting definition. When you think about that, a lot of people, when they just think about um, domestic violence or things like that, they automatically just think fighting or physical harm. But it does include sexual coercion, making people do things they don't want to do, using your powers to make people do things, or just to coerce people. Why is family violence a serious issue? Now, family violence is a serious issue for a couple different reasons, and I'm gonna point out a few. The home is where everything starts, and I firmly believe that. That's why it's a serious issue, because if you think about it, this community, our communities, all of them are made up of multiple homes, and home is where it starts. So we raise our children, and we should, display a certain character and a certain behavior around them that should not include family violence. And from there, our children come up seeing that in the home, and they go outside of our homes and display that. If multiple homes and homes all around the world were putting out positive into our community, and that positive starts in their home, this world will be a different place. Definitely be a different place. Also, it affects the community around the home. I touched on that briefly. And not just in the community, but in schools. When you raise a child a certain way, you have to consider the fact that that child is then going to go to school and have an impact on other kids' lives. It can be a generational cycle that's not easily broken. Statistics show that most children who witness or are involved in family domestic violence growing up, more than likely they either enter relationships where they're being abused, or they're the abuser, because that's what they grew up around and that's what they know. Um, One interesting fact that I found was over 40 million adult Americans grew up living with domestic violence. 40 million. That's a staggering number. Now, victims of domestic violence, they suffer with a few things, and just to point out a few, depression. Most victims of domestic violence, they grow up and they're depressed. They're never happy. It's like they're missing something. It's because they're lacking that love, especially that comes from home. Anxiety. When you come from being beat, or someone come around you, you're going to think you're going to get hit, or you don't want to speak or say or do certain things because of that anxiety that you built up from your experience of being in this abusive relationship. Low self-esteem, also comes with it. A lot of people that are in domestic violence think it's their fault that they're being abused. So all of those things goes on with domestic violence. Now, when it comes to the effects of family violence on children, I would like to point out a few interesting topics that I found in my research. One says domestic violence in childhood is directly correlated with difficulties in learning, lower IQ scores, deficiencies in visual and motor skills, and problems with attention and memory. So domestic violence does affect children a lot more than what we actually give it credit for. Those who grow up with domestic violence are 6 times more likely to commit suicide, and 50% more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol. Because you find these people, they grow up and they still remember things and experiences they had as a child. So to medicate that, they do. They abuse drugs and alcohol. I have a lot of family friends that are victims of that to this day. They're in their 30s and 40s. Also, statistics says that if you grow up with domestic violence, you're 74% more likely to commit a violent crime against someone else, and that goes back into the generational cycle. When children grow up seeing violence, they're more likely to put off, give out violence. Also, children from homes with violence are much more likely to experience significant psychological problems, short and long term. Children who've experienced domestic violence often meet the diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, and the effects on the brain are similar to those experienced by combat veterans. And that's serious. That's serious because when you think about it, veterans go through life or death experiences every day, and those things change their lives. And for that to have the same impact or similar impact as a child that's going through domestic violence, that's really something to think about. Because when you think about it, that child is young and vulnerable, and that child's worldview is still being put together, and them seeing their mom and dad fight, that's a traumatic experience. Just as if someone was going to war. Over 5 million children witness domestic violence each year, and that's just in the United States. The effects on the communities. The effects that domestic violence have on communities is that it increases the mental health issues. Because, like I said, because of domestic violence, it causes things like anxiety, depression, a lot of different mental health issues, PTSD, things like that. The higher crime rates. Because of the children growing up in home, they seeing violence, they go out and they portray violence. So that plays into the crime rate. It really does. And because of the lower IQ scores and things like that, the mental effect that it have on our kids, that means that we're putting off less and less productive citizens into our communities. So that's why we need to take this family violence thing a lot more serious than we do. Let's talk about family violence in rural areas for a little while. In rural areas, family violence is way harder to deal with than in the urban area. I spent a significant amount of my life in a rural area as well. So I kind of travel back and forth. And they can be very small. One person can know everybody. And so if domestic violence is going on, it can be a lot harder to deal with because you're going to know. Most of the time, people are going to know that your mom is at home, your dad is at home beating your mom. And that's something hard to deal with when you go to school as a child and your friends know that your mom and dad fights all the time. Also in the rural area, the community is a lot smaller and everyone tends to know everyone. I touched that. When an individual goes for help, the professional may also be a person very close who also lives nearby. And that's another thing. A lot of times in small rural areas, the social worker may be your neighbor or somebody that knows your family, and also because of the community is smaller, there are less resources as well. In an urban area, on the other end, it's not as noticeable because there's so many more people, and also domestic violence happens a lot It happens a lot more in urban areas because of the population is so much larger, and because of that, there's more resources. And also in the urban area, you're more likely to find somebody who actually specializes in a certain area that can help somebody with more specific needs. When it comes to access to resources in rural areas, the resources available are very limited, and one person may have multiple roles. In urban areas, there are a lot of different types of resources to choose from, i.e., mental health facilities or counseling. In an urban area, the family is more likely to see a professional who specializes in certain areas. I'm sorry. And then I'm sorry, I messed up. In an urban area, you're more likely to see somebody who specializes in something, but in a rural area, you're more likely to see a social worker who has multiple roles, who has to do this and that because the lack of staffing. Now, in the midst of domestic violence, to wrap up, social workers play different roles. They can be a counselor, listening and working with the victims as they go through this hard experience. They can be an educator, pointing the mom or the child into the right direction to let them know what options they have and which routes they can take. Or they can advocate when the young lady or even the guy or when the person, the victim, feel like they can't speak for themselves. The social worker can do that for them. And also they can protect, especially when it comes to the children. The social workers can help make decisions with the children's best interests at heart. The empathy that a social worker shows as he or she works with the victim of domestic violence is very important. Most of the time, social workers empower women to stand up and seek help. So that's a very important role that a social worker plays. It's important that the social workers are involved in the children's lives as well to ensure that they are in the best environment as possible. So as you can see, a social worker is a key figure in a domestic violence case. They have a lot to bring to the situation, and I think that they also have the heart to help. After this presentation, I pray that no one participates or is a victim of domestic violence. If you do, seek help. I'm here in Huntsville, Alabama, and there are a lot of domestic violence. There are domestic violence hotlines. There are domestic violence centers. So just Google one near you and just reach out. Again, my name is Jeremy Smith, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Good night.